Hey listeners, a quick note from me, Josh. During this episode with Dr. Jason Van Heukelum, you are going to hear several references to a new film from Ted Dintersmith titled Multiple Choice. This film tells the story of a medium-sized public school district in Virginia, its visionary superintendent, Dr. Van Heukelum, my guest for this episode, Winchester's John Handley High School, and something called the Shihadeh Innovation Center. Ted Dintersmith and the team at What School Could Be believe this film is a game changer, capable of shifting the divisive national conversation around college and vocational training. Stay tuned to whatschoolcouldbe.org for more information on when this film will be released and how to organize a screening in your home community. Again, that is whatschoolcouldbe.org. And now, on to the show.
This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. Listeners, buckle up. You're about to meet a Virginia public school superintendent whose mother referred to him as Tom Sawyer, and for good reason. Dr. Jason Van Heukelum has been rallying people around bold visions since his earliest days in Rochester, New York. We can only imagine him convincing friends to join some backyard adventure, or today, getting entire communities to reimagine high school. Jason is someone who knows how to design and build and bring others with him. He's also the kind of educator, coach, guide, and mentor who sees transformation not as a someday ideal, but as a here and now imperative. His 27-year journey includes teaching math, coaching sports, leading middle and high schools, and directing an American international school in La Paz, Bolivia. He brings deep systems experience from classrooms to central office and a rock-solid belief that the secret to great schools lies in pairing high expectations with a deep connection to community, where so much of learning happens. Today, he's the superintendent of Winchester Public Schools in Virginia and the driving force behind something extraordinary, the Emil and Grace Shihadeh Innovation Center, a cathedral to possibility and purpose that redefines what high school could be. No bells, just young people walking through doors into real-world learning and a buffet of multiple choices. But before we get there, we're heading to Algonquin, Canada, where a young Jason portaged a canoe across miles of wilderness. We'll linger in Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament book that moves him even on the hardest days, to rejoice in the work and find meaning in the mystery. We'll talk about the speed of trust, why relationships drive change, and what Jason means when he says, quote, "The most important lessons we learn cannot be measured by standardized tests," end quote. We'll dive into Empower 2025, his strategic vision for Winchester, and how a grad school capstone is becoming real through collaborative, school-based services. We'll explore cell phone policy, cathedral thinking, the future of public education, and the courage it takes to build innovation that lasts. And in the end, we'll honor the wisdom of a mentor named Penny Hedrick, whose support Jason carries every day. To close this intro, I'll quote from a letter written on Jason's behalf. Quote, "The best leaders make everyone around them better. The best leaders improve the organization they lead, cultivate passionate and loyal followers who believe in their vision, and pave the way for future leaders to carry on their work when they are gone. Jason Van Heukelum is one of the best leaders I have had the opportunity to work with, end quote. And now, here is my conversation with Winchester Public Schools Superintendent, Dr. Jason Van Heukelum. Jason, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Great. Thank you. Looking forward to it and happy to be here.
So, Jason, we'll get into your work in the Winchester, Virginia public schools a bit later in the conversation. But first, let's let our listeners get to know you. So, when I was a kid, Jason, growing up in very rural Hawaii, one of my first young adult reads was Twain's Tom Sawyer. And you shared that your mom always called you Tom Sawyer because of your uncanny ability to get other people involved in your vision of work. So this was a total revelation for me because here in 2025, 57 years after I read Tom Sawyer, and because of your mom, I now have a way of explaining my infamous reputation built on the same perceived ability. So our listeners would love to hear a story or two about you gathering folks into your vision of work early in your life. And we wonder how it feels to have this mom-designated reputation.
Yeah, that's a great story. And, it's something that is a piece of the lore, if you will, in our family history. And I get teased a little bit about it at the family reunions around Thanksgiving and the holidays. But no, I mean, that's something my mom has always kind of said about me when I was growing up as a child. I was the one that somehow would organize the group of friends in whatever setting, whether that was just kids hanging out at the house or a birthday party, into something, an activity or a project, or quite frankly, sometimes when I had chores to do, just like Tom Sawyer got everybody else to paint the fence,
Yep.
I had an uncanny ability to say, hey, why don't y'all help me get my stuff done so we can go play faster, right? We always like to go play football in the backyard. And, my parents were pretty intent on me having things done prior to going out and playing. And so, I was able to, cast that vision for my friends of, this could take me an hour by myself, but if y'all help me, man, we can get this done in 10 minutes and we can rock and roll. So it's been a funny thing to reflect on and then see that play out in my adult life. And even now, having been in educational leadership for almost 30 years, my team and my teams even throughout my career have always jokingly said, well, he really knows how to use the F button. And of course, the F button is the forward button. As things come through in that tyrannical email inbox, I'm quick to find out, well, that belongs to so, and quickly assign the work to make sure it gets done. And I hope it's said with affection from my team. I'm sure sometimes it's said with a curse word or two.
Over the course of my life, when I started to realize that that was something that I was actually pretty good at, was organizing other people. And you're right, for me, even as well, it was about getting the work done so that you could do something else that you also wanted to do or really wanted to do. And I wonder, how did that feel for you over the course of your life? Did you, it's kind of a weird question because we're asking about feelings, but nevertheless, it's sort of a sense of confidence in your ability to galvanize people around a particular idea?
For sure. And, one of the phrases I use with my leaders is, leaders don't do the work. Leaders make sure the work gets done. And certainly there's a place for what you might call servant leadership or symbolic leadership, where leaders get their hands dirty and kind of get in the weeds and quote, do real work. But at the end of the day, in an organization like a school system or a school division, here is what we call it in Virginia, I can't do everything, right? And nor is that my job. My job is to make sure that the work is lined up, that the vision is clear, that we have the right people assigned to the right work, and that we're all held accountable for that work to get things done for students and make sure our kids are thriving at a deep level. And so there's sometimes where, you might feel as that leader, like, well, what am I doing? I'm not teaching kids how to read, or I'm not facilitating professional development for our staff. But there's also deep satisfaction as a leader when you see your team, the leaders underneath you, executing a game plan and leading, and they themselves thriving professionally. And there's good culture, good climate within the organization. And there's real work to be done. And people are working hard, of course, and dedicated to that work. But I love to see our people lead and to see the beautiful tapestry of all their gifts and talents come together like an orchestra,
Yeah.
and kind of sit back and watch everyone contribute to the overall vision and mission based on their role, their gifts and talents, their assignments, etc.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's stay with your early life. You shared with me that one of your most intense learning experiences was a canoeing portaging trip to Algonquin, Canada, while you were in high school. So I would love to know the story of this trip and what made it such an intense learning experience. And then, what did the trip teach you? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn from Mother Nature during this trip?
Yeah, that's a great memory, and to this day, resonates with some of the lessons I learned on that trip. And so, I was 16 at the time. I think it was the summer between my 10th grade and 11th grade year,
Mm.
and I had an opportunity to go. It was called a wilderness pilgrimage,
Wow.
and so me and my best friend in high school, our parents got together and said, "Y'all should do this," and they sent us off, right? And so we get up there and we're in Algonquin, Canada. Of course, we lived in Rochester, New York, so it was just across the border. And we didn't know what to expect. We were just young kids, and they put you in a canoe, and there's I think 10 people in the group, and there was a guide, of course. And I'll never forget that first day, and we had canoed before. We thought we're athletic, et cetera. Like, no big deal, right?
Right.
We get in the canoe and, we got our stuff. We start paddling, and the guide is within, let's say, 30 minutes, the guide is a speck in the distance. And we're paddling for our life, trying to catch up to the guide, and slowly the physical wear and tear that, takes on you. And like, man, this is not easy. It started out, no problem, no big deal. Halfway through the lake, you're like tired, exhausted, etc.
Mm.
The best part, of course, if you know Algonquin and the lakes up there, you get to the end of the lake, and guess what? You got a portage.
Yeah.
So, you get to the end of the lake, the guide's waiting there, and he's like, all right, we're going to carry everything to this other lake.
Mm.
And it's about half a mile or three-quarters of a mile. And we're like, well, what do you mean? You're putting a canoe on your back, and the yoke kind of digs into your shoulders, right? And,
Yeah.
you're carrying a backpack. One of you's got the gear, one of you's got the canoe. And you get to the other lake, and we got there and thought, okay, this is good. Are we going to camp now? No, we're going to paddle to the other side of this lake, and we're going to do it again. And we're going to do it again. And it was 7 days of, canoeing, portaging, and beautiful campsites at night. But we were physically exhausted. And I'll never forget, like halfway through the trip, my buddy and I were like, "Well, are we done yet?" We're like, "We're done. Like, can we just stop?" And there was this moment of like, you're out there in the middle of the wilderness, and you literally can't quit. You cannot say, "I'm done,"
Mm.
because you have to get back.
Right.
And that was the lesson, I think, primarily is one, there's moments in life where you just can't stop. You can't quit.
Mm.
And you recognize the resiliency of the human spirit and even the human body, that the human spirit and the human body can do way more than we give it credit for, sometimes in the day-to-day moments. And that's a lesson that I've taken with me both personally, through the challenges in my own personal life, and then professionally, is, you got to keep going. You got to take the next step.
Mm. And I understand because you shared this with me that in the end, you actually built your own canoe or your own kayak. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, that was recently. Had been a dream of mine to build my own boat, and in this case, I was able to build a kayak from a wooden kit. It came in the mail from an outfitter, and all the pieces were pre-cut. But I did have to stitch and glue it together, use the
Mm.
polyurethane and the silicone and fiberglass, and create that from in my garage. Took me about a year to do, and a joy. And now I
Mm,
have this beautiful wooden kayak that I use regularly and have outfitted for fishing and whatnot. And
mm.
still to this day, that water experience with the canoeing up in Algonquin is something that I still gravitate towards.
Yeah, that's awesome. My family here in Hawaii, we grew up building wooden boats and either sailing or rowing wooden boats. And I really know, I experienced firsthand what you described as you're halfway between the beginning and the end, and you literally can't stop. Your life depends on that. And it's such an incredible thing to experience something like that. You have to dig really deep in order to get past that point and to move towards the end. So that's super cool. Okay, so Jason, slight left turn here, or let's say a southern turn here. I think it'd be safe to say that your family's years in Bolivia, where you directed an American international school and where your daughter was born, were profoundly formative in the most expansive sense of the word. So, what about those years and all the experiences that you had do you carry with you in your proverbial backpack?
Yeah, that is certainly one. And 17 years later, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of our 3 years in Bolivia. If you come into my office, you're going to see pictures of the mountains there. We lived in La Paz, Bolivia,
Mm,
about 12,000 feet above sea level in the Andes Mountains. We were in our early 30s at the time. My wife and I had the opportunity to lead an international school there. And then, of course, our daughter was born there. So it was very impactful. That's just one experience. And I think from that experience, one of the things I learned, it was the first time I really professionally worked with elementary. That
mm,
was profound. I'd always been a high school guy. I was a high school teacher, high school assistant principal, and had just finished leading a middle school as a principal before we left. So, one of the profound things I saw was just how incredible our elementary teachers are across the world, and of course in the United States. Like, I wanted to take some of my high school friends and say, "You don't know what hard is. Let's go to a kindergarten classroom."
mm,
And to watch the beauty of their processes, right? Like, they have to teach how to go to the bathroom. They have to teach how to sharpen your pencil, all the procedures and processes within a classroom so that learning can be efficient and effective. They've got to teach kids how to do it. And many times I find our secondary folks assume or think kids should know, right?
mm,
And so the big lesson instructionally I took away from that is 16-year-olds are just big kindergartners, and they equally need to know how to function in your classroom, in your environment. And
mm,
the more clear and direct we are with processes and procedures, the more likely our kids are to be successful in learning the actual content. If we walk in as educators and just say, well, you're 16, you should know this, then we're making the wrong assumption.
mm,
And our kids suffer for that. So that was a lesson there. Another lesson, gosh, I mean, it was my only time as a professional where I was outside of the tyrannical accountability system of
mm,
public education. And so to see the freedom and flexibility and what that can yield for both students and teachers, where you literally have no rules, right? I mean, of course, we're preparing kids for life. That's the whole goal of the school. And in this setting, most of our families, it was a college bound, college kind of focus for secondary in particular. And
mhm.
if we didn't do our job right, then their SAT scores wouldn't be good and their applications wouldn't be good and they wouldn't get into college.
Right.
But we didn't have this annual kind of threat or, constant oversight. And we just had a lot of freedom and flexibility. And that produced a lot of innovation, produced a lot of joy. It allowed for unlocking time.
Mm,
Right now, in a lot of public school settings, there's this tension between what we would like to do with students and then time and
mm,
quote covering the curriculum.
mm.
And so we were able to make decisions in a much more free way. And, I'll never forget that. And there's times where I'm like, man, I wish I could have a little bit of that freedom back.
Mm. Would it be fair to say that the faculty and administrative culture was a little more family-like, if you will, because of the freedom from these sort of tyrannical evaluations that come down from above?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, yeah. No, that was very much a family. Of course, it was smaller too,
Hmm.
and having preschool through 12th grade on the same campus also lent itself to that family atmosphere. I mean, from the student point of view,
Yeah.
watching the little mini buses roll in and a 17-year-old pick up a 4-year-old and pull them down, and kind of help them off the bus. I mean, it was very family oriented and a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so Jason, 50 years ago in Hawaii, I used to hitchhike home from high school and then eat a bowl of ramen and read the Old Testament and then go do the yard work my father required, which was hard. And you've cited Ecclesiastes, a book in the Old Testament that speaks directly to the fleeting nature of human effort and the mystery of life as one of the most influential texts in your life's journey. So, in a field like public education, where progress is really hard won and outcomes are often delayed, and the work can feel cyclical or even like perpetually rolling a rock up a mountain, how do you personally hold on to purpose and hope? In other words, when Ecclesiastes asks, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? How do you answer that question as an educational leader?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, full disclosure, I'm the son of a Baptist preacher, so
Mm,
and
hmm.
I'll never forget and always appreciate when my father used to preach through Ecclesiastes, and it's one of his favorite books, so that's probably why it resonates with me still to this day.
Mm,
And I think there's just a wisdom in there of yes, there is a tendency to become discouraged or to think, I'm doing this hard thing or we're doing this hard thing. And maybe a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, it's going to be all undone, maybe, or whatever.
mm,
And yet, the book of Ecclesiastes points to this idea of like, even though that may be true, there's joy and there's also purpose in the work on a day-to-day basis. And so
mm,
one of the phrases is, whatever your hand finds to do it and do it well, in the moment. And so instead of having an attitude of despair or an attitude of, this isn't possible or this isn't worth it, having an attitude of joy, but also an attitude of overcoming and leaving a legacy for those that come behind. And,
mm,
in my career, always pushing that envelope has been kind of one of the hallmarks of my approach. I'm not interested in doing the status quo when I think the vision of the future can be better. And
mm,
so we
mm.
should engage in that work. And hopefully over time, there's some lasting impact because of that.
Mm. I want to go a little bit deeper here. Ecclesiastes urges us to rejoice in our toil and eat, drink, and be glad, for these are gifts from God. So, what for you, Jason, is the equivalent in your work, the part that brings you joy in the midst of all the complexity and constraint? Like, what do you, when you raise a glass, what are you raising a glass to in your work in that sort of ecclesiastical sense?
Mm. Yeah, two things. First and foremost, probably well above anything else, is when I see the impact of our collective work in the lives
Mm,
of students.
mm,
And, one of the hard challenges I think of leadership in schools, most of us came up through the ranks of teachers, coaches, et cetera.
yeah.
And I was a teacher and a coach. And every step you go in leadership, you start to remove yourself from the students, not figuratively, but on a day-to-day basis, right? I'm
Yeah.
no longer coaching a team that I get to know really, really well, know their names, their families, their intimate stories. I no longer teach kids in a classroom for 180 days a year, where over that time period, I really get to know them. They get to know me and feel like I've had an impact personally on their life.
Mm,
And so now that joy for me comes when structures systems, other people that have been either inspired by our work, have joined the work, are having that impact in the lives of students. And, we see these 18-year-olds cross the stage with a vision for their life
Mm,
because of our collective kind of framework of how we do business here in Winchester. And we use that phrase, a vision for your life, intentionally. Like that's what we want every kid to develop is, and a vision for the life, not necessarily an exact occupation or career or where I'm going to go to college, et cetera, but what is my vision for my life? And when you have a vision for your life, you have confidence, right? You have a smile on your face. You're ready to tackle the next hard thing.
mm,
And so that brings me the most joy. And some of these students, that I get to see and hear their stories, I know their name. I get to hear from the educators that work with them a little bit about their story, but truthfully, I don't know them well, right?
yeah, right.
But I see their outcomes, and that brings me immense satisfaction.
Mm,
The second thing would be, the adults in the organization. When I see the adults in our organization thriving, they love coming to work, and even when the work is hard, right? And
yeah.
so that's my highest hope is that we collectively commit to doing really hard work, and it's not easy, and there's moments of frustration and challenges that we have to work through, but at the end of the day, when my team comes to work and they enjoy the work, they enjoy working with each other, and they're committed to the vision, that brings me immense satisfaction as well. And I
Mm,
can kind of sit back and watch them work together. And there's nothing like it, right? I mean,
mm,
it's again that orchestra example, the conductor just listening to a beautiful piece of music where everyone's playing their part.
mm. Okay, so one more sort of ecclesiastically related question before we go to our first break, Jason. You also cited a book titled The Speed of Trust as influential. And I really love this phrase. It's been a guiding principle for me for a very long time now. And it sounds to me like you've done a lot of thinking about the process of building relationships in your work. And by the way, I did an episode with a public school principal in Rhode Island who believes hope is born from building relationships. So, what are your thoughts about the speed of trust, about building relationships, and about hope?
Yeah, this is a seminal book for our organization. We have two books that are required reading of every leader. One is The Speed of Trust, the other is Radical Candor.
Hmm.
But with the speed of trust, from a leader point of view, a utilitarian point of view, what do you get out of it, right? Well, what you get out of the speed of trust is the ability to implement and change things with great speed, right? When there's high trust in an organization and we're going to tackle a new problem, we don't have to question each other's motivations or credibility. And so we can move quicker than if there's no trust. It's like oil in the machine.
Yeah.
If there's no oil, those gears grind to a halt and you're not going to get anything done.
Mm.
When you
Hmm.
unpack that though, and speaking specifically of relationships, because I do think in our business, sometimes we have a misunderstanding of relationships. So to me, on a professional level in particular, relationships are born and forged and melded together when two or more people, whether it's two, five, seven, whatever, are working collectively towards a common mission or vision. They're working on something together.
Yeah.
Relationships don't just happen by, hanging out together. When you and I, for example, Josh, have been talking about this podcast for 3 months, right?
Yep. We have.
Our relationship has a third part, and it's this podcast, this vision for what school could be.
Yes.
And that has forged our relationship. So I bristle sometimes when leaders and educators say, well, it's all about relationships. And all you got to do is build those relationships with kids or teachers or whatever.
Yeah.
That's true, but that's very surface level. We build relationships through a common purpose and setting the work together and doing that work together. And if all our relationship is kind of quote getting to know each other a little bit, that's very surface level. It's very shallow, and
Hmm.
it doesn't save the day. When the hard times come, you and I aren't going to forge through that together
Mm.
because we don't have a common purpose. So,
Yeah.
speed of trust really unpacks that. The other thing is we don't need to confuse trust relationship with we're buddies.
Yeah.
and we're hanging out after work. Like,
Yeah.
we can have high trust and good relationship around the work, and trust also comes with credibility. You trust your doctor who delivers, right?
We
That
do.
doctor you may never see outside, but they did surgery on you and you trust them, right?
Yeah.
So trust has a number of different dimensions. And so that allows organizations to move quicker and implement things at a more efficient and effective level.
Mm. And I guess I'll just finish with asking, that as we rejoice in our toil and eat, drink, and be glad, for these are gifts from God, in a sense, that authenticity of the speed of trust and the kinds of relationships that you're talking about is very helpful, I guess, in rejoicing in the toil, because the toil can be really hard at times. In fact, it probably is most of the time, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I know we're going to get into some of the cool, innovative stuff that we geek out on a little bit and enjoy the most. But, I'm sorry, running a school division, being a principal,
Yeah.
being a teacher,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on, right? You got a lot of people's lives intersecting at different moments, and you're dealing with everything from student discipline issues, right, that are real and happen every day. Staff
Yeah.
don't always make the best choices, so personnel takes up a large chunk of a leader's time. And board relations, community relations, and politics in particular can really dominate the space for superintendents. We're
Yeah.
in a time right now in our country where the turnover rate for superintendents is pretty high.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is based on community relationships and perceptions of what schools are doing, public schools in particular, politics, et cetera. And that's some of the stuff that's not easy. It's not,
Yeah.
it's a distraction, but you've got to deal with it. And if you don't, as a leader, it will bite you. And so, as much as I would like to spend 100% of my time on things like the Innovation Center,
Yeah.
I know as the leader of this school division, I've got to deal with all that other stuff
Yeah.
so that my team can do really important work. And if I
Awesome.
don't deal with it, it will hijack the vision of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, hey everyone, we've been speaking with Dr. Jason Van Heukelum. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Greg Bear, along with Ryan Rudzeski, and we're the co-hosts of the Remaking Tomorrow podcast,
a series of conversations about the future of learning.
We encourage you to find and listen to the Remaking Tomorrow podcast wherever you listen to your pods.
You'll find over 60 past episodes that you can browse and listen to whenever you'd like.
Remaking Tomorrow is powered by Remake Learning. Learn more at remakelearning.org.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my two podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
What I find that I value most from leadership experiences is being able to work with a variety of different people.
At Inspire Citizens, we support schools with whole school global citizenship education. Hear stories of this work directly from students on our Empathy to Impact podcast.
When you do something good, you feel good inside as well. You're helping people. You're making a change.
How might students transform your community today? Find out by listening to the Empathy to Impact podcast.
Hey everyone, we are back with Dr. Jason Van Heukelum, the Superintendent of Public Instruction in Virginia's Winchester Public Schools. So Jason, you and I both watched and have screened Ted Dintersmith's acclaimed film, Most Likely to Succeed. Your comment to me related to Ted's film, and I quote, was, "The most important lessons we learn cannot be measured in standardized testing." So let's have you go way back in your life, back again to Algonquin, Canada, and share how that story you have already shared is a case study in what is important and what can and cannot be measured.
Yeah, I still believe that to this day. And, when you think of that story in particular, you're thinking maybe of grit or perseverance,
Yeah.
those type of lessons that were learned on that journey. But, I would say for the last 15 years, we have been striving, I think we collectively in public education in general towards, the 5 C's, right? These terms that we throw around: critical thinking, communication, et cetera.
Yeah.
And truthfully, when you talk to average citizens in our communities, when you ask them what do you hope for out of public education, those are the things they go to. They want graduates that can think critically, that can communicate. Certainly the colleges and universities and jobs, the industry market is saying, hey, send us some kids that can think. And yet here we are consistently and perpetually measuring things that have four choices and only one of them is correct.
Right.
And it really begs the question, what are we doing? Our kids are being programmed to, read short passages and answer 5 questions and think that's the measure of learning. And yet, I think if we step out of that, normal people would say, well, no, we need them to learn a bunch of other stuff that is not measurable on a standardized test. And so that's really, I think, the crux of where we're at in education and how we can redefine what success looks like and redefine the school day for students so that they're engaged in that level of work.
Wow. So if I go back to your story, it doesn't feel possible to actually measure anything sort of concrete in that moment where you realize that you can't stop, that you have to keep on going because you're halfway between the beginning and the end and your life depends on it. You know what I'm asking? It's like, how do you measure something like that? And it feels so reductive, Jason, to just say, well, this person was really gritty, so I'm going to check that box on a sheet. It doesn't feel right.
Right. I mean, I think the only way to measure it is through stories and self-reflection and then the experiences that we place students in so they can have those moments, right? And so that's where the redesign has to really come to the forefront from a passive learning environment, which historically is what we've had in education, where teacher is delivering knowledge, students consume knowledge, for the record, in a short cycle learning memory basis, regurgitate that learning back to the teacher, let's say in 5 to 10 days, and that's the extent of it. Whereas what we saw in Most Likely to Succeed, and what many of us are trying to figure out how we can do differently, is authentic real world problem solving with students, whereby they do have to access real knowledge, whether it's math, history, English, or science, to solve real problems, but they're doing it collaboratively, maybe with a team. They're iterizing along the way. They have built-in opportunities for success and failure. And then that metacognitive reflection, I think, is the key piece of what we as educators can bring to the table, to the process, whereby skilled educators, teachers in this case, are having those metacognitive conversations with students so they can articulate, reflect, and think about their experience and say, wow, I pushed through, that impossible task, or I felt really frustrated and I wanted to give up, or I did give up. What's the lesson there? And those are the moments where we could design experiences where kids can have a lot of different learning outcomes that, again, we wouldn't measure on a standardized test. But it takes, an experience that can lead us there, and then some adults in the room to help facilitate that. So real quick, just, going back to that Algonquin experience, we haven't talked about the guide.
We forgot about the guide.
There's a guide, right? And so while I articulated my personal experience, what I haven't shared is the fireside chats, right? There was a caring, wise adult that guided me through that experience and helped me as a 16-year-old unpack that day and the feelings that I had, or the moment I threw my oar over the boat and said, I ain't going any further, right? And I think that's important. We got to remember the guide.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so Jason, it's time to get into the Innovation Center. So in 2024, I read a book titled The Good Ancestor, and no joke, it changed my life. And in it, the author talks about, quote, cathedral thinking, meaning a way of seeing one's work as laying the cornerstone to a structure that people will be working on or, generations after one has passed on. And I feel like this is a good way to begin talking about the cornerstone that you and others laid and the cathedral you are building in the best Tom Sawyer kind of sense. And that cathedral, which is called the Emil and Grace Shihadeh Innovation Center. So as we open the door to this Innovation Center, allow me to ask you if the religion that will be practiced in this cathedral is the radical transformation of the American high school at scale.
Yes, yes, that is the hope. And we're 4 years into our innovation experience, and I have to qualify maybe that is the vision, the goal. And yet, if you talk to my team, they'll quickly tell you that Dr. Van Heukelum says we're about halfway there. So, for as proud as I am about where we are at with the Innovation Center, there's still more work to be done. But I like the term radical because that's what we're after. And we had an opportunity here in Winchester to create something, and a lot of things came together from city council funding to just opportunity knocks kind of opportunities for us to do this. And I see the Innovation Center as an incubator for that radical transformation. The question now for me is, can we take it to scale in a traditional high school that we have with 1,350 kids and football team and, the play and everything else that would come with a typical American high school?
So I guess maybe what I'm asking here is the feeling around the center now 4 years into this project, if you will, almost religious in its fervor? Like people believe, they really believe, and there's a lot of faith that's carrying people forward as you continue to build and design and tweak and rebuild again and so on.
Yeah, we're getting there for sure. Like we're at this point now where I'll speak from a teacher lens, So for those of you who don't know, the Innovation Center combines your career technical education with core academics, and we intentionally use English there. And now, because of the design of the building and the learning model, quite frankly, we have teachers that cannot imagine teaching anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
The freedom, flexibility, autonomy that they have is so much a part of their day that they bristle at the idea of going back to a traditional schedule where a bell rings every 90 minutes and I get a new group of kids.
Yeah.
And so that is really palpable. If you talk with our students, and again, going back to design, a little background knowledge here. So, typical high school experience for our students, they spend half of their day at the Innovation Center in a 3-hour chunk of time. But the other part of their day, they're down at our main campus in a very traditional environment. And again, because of the design and a lot of other factors, while they're at the Innovation Center, that freedom and flexibility, that student agency is so real that students will tell you it's the best part of their day, right?
Yeah.
I jokingly say, our 18-year-olds have to raise their hand to go to the bathroom in most high schools in America.
Yeah.
And if you really think about that, it's somewhat ludicrous. Here you are, we're about to launch you into adulthood.
Yeah.
And for 7 hours a day, 180 days a year, you've got to, be told where to go to the bathroom and when and all this other stuff. And so at the Innovation Center, kids have freedom and flexibility. They own the whole space. They're all over that campus. They take great pride in that. And because the learning is project oriented and deadline oriented, time is the negotiable piece.
Yeah.
And they can manage their time in such a way to get things done.
Okay, so I know after what you've just said that our listeners are going to have 20 questions about the Shihadeh Center. So let's do a lightning round that gets the key components on the table. So these are quick prompts and quick responses, okay? So number one, John Handley High School is the only high school in the Winchester district or division. How many elementary schools and how many middle schools feed into John Handley High School? How big is the district?
Yeah, we're 4,300 students. We have 4 elementary schools, 1 intermediate school, 5, 6, and 1 middle school, 7, 8.
Okay. And can you describe what it was like when students first entered the doors of the Shihadeh Center 4 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little anxiety because of
Mm,
the learning model. There was obvious kind of a wow factor. It was a brand new building, well, renovated building, and had all the bells and whistles that you would expect in a new a remodeled building. So it looked great. And the CTE or the career classes were state of the art. I mean, our welding lab, our carpentry lab, our nursing lab, our advanced technologies lab, and
mm.
lots of toys. I mean, we have a lot of toys up there that are just really cool.
Yeah.
And so that space was very exciting and inviting for our students. The anxiety piece honestly came with this like, oh, wait a minute, I have projects that I got to complete and
Mm.
I can't just sit and listen and do a test on Friday. That learning model is going to be different. And so, students aren't used to that, so they had to learn how to figure that out.
Wow. I'm already thinking, it's almost like a canoe trip, and you have to portage. It's like you get halfway out, you can't just stop. You have to keep on going. Okay. So the Shahada Center is not technically optional, meaning a before or after school program for John Hanley students, correct? Like, what does this mean in practical terms?
Yeah, so one of the things that I believe makes this very different than other settings with career technical education is all of us, the school board, leadership, and our community put a stake in the ground and said career classes are for everyone.
Yeah.
And in most high schools, you could have the most diverse high school on the planet, but as soon as the bell rings, we're all going to go to our corners.
Yep.
And AP classes go here, and the remedial classes go there, et cetera. And we said, no, this is going to be a space in our school where every kid goes. I don't care if you're going to Harvard or going to work. There is value in taking career classes. There's
Yeah.
value in working with your hands. There are transferable skills that you may never weld another day in your life, but there are some transferable skills that will play out in your life that are
Mm.
real and valuable. And so by taking that approach, we have ultimately eliminated that kind of gamesmanship with GPAs, and I'm not going to take this class because I want another quality point on my GPA, et cetera. And
Yeah.
we've raised the dignity of our CTE classes. And then nothing
Mm.
brings me more joy than going into those classrooms and seeing all of my students involved and working together, regardless of their ambition, at 14, 15, 16 years old, or quite frankly, regardless of their parents' ambition in some cases.
Right. So, briefly, who are the teachers, coaches, mentors, guides who work in the Shahada Center? How are their job descriptions different from a traditional Carnegie unit faculty at a high school?
Yeah, so you have your career technical teachers and you have your English teachers up there. Those are the teachers involved. We have a site administrator, we have a work-based learning coach, our career technical education coordinators there. We have a community college liaison there, and we also have, special education support, English language learner support, et cetera, in the building. The biggest difference is that teachers also have to navigate time. Right. And
Right.
so because students, we're going to put a bunch of kids there for 3 hours. There's no bells. Students and teachers have to navigate that time. And we have structures to do this. So it's not just willy-nilly, but teachers and students have to navigate time to get the work done, to get the learning done,
Yeah.
whether that's in the welding lab or whether that's in the English classroom. And so with that, teachers also have to navigate things like their own planning time, right?
Mhm.
Because, it's not going to be necessarily the same every single day. And what we find is, the teachers also get lost in time just like the kids. And There's this joy that comes from being purposeful in your time. And then there's different moments. So, instead of having 25 kids isolated in a room for 90 minutes and your job is to teach them English,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm teaching in a lecture style and I might have 40 kids. A lot of times I'm teaching 10 kids because it's Socratic seminar. And other times I'm doing some one-on-one, maybe one-on-3 remedial tutoring or just-in-time tutoring based on data that I've received from the English assessments, right? Because we still got to meet all of the standards that you would in any other school. So the groupings change on a daily or weekly basis based on the needs of the student and the teachers. And teachers are really having to think, and I'm thinking more the academic side, right? The academic teachers have to think, what content is really viable to teach in a large group setting? Sometimes we overcompensate and think lectures aren't good anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, I've learned a lot in a lecture, and,
Yeah.
and a good lecture can be very powerful. And a lot of students can also be very efficient. And so teachers are thinking through, what am I trying to get across to kids? What's the best way to do that? And if I can do it in a lecture for 20 minutes with 50 kids and knock it out, that's very efficient learning, right? But then that maybe Socratic seminar piece where we're analyzing a piece of literature, gosh, that's much more conducive to 10 kids in a circle, right?
Right.
Because of that freedom and flexibility, I can create those spaces for learning.
Okay, so if I'm in your 2025 incoming ninth grade class, what does the Shihadeh Center's buffet of multiple choices look and sound and feel like to me?
So we have 3 academies. We have a professional skills academy, we have advanced technologies, and then we have health sciences. So those are the 3 big buckets. And within those academies are your typical courses that you would find in most high schools, right? From welding, carpentry, electricity, to nurse aid, med lab tech, physical therapy, and then cybersecurity, electricity. We have a drone program. We added firefighting and EMT recently, very popular classes. So that's the menu, if you will. And of course, as freshmen, you're taking some introductory classes in those career technical education classes. And then you can go deeper year by year. And you can also jump. And we have plenty of stories. We believe very firmly it's equally valuable to learn what you don't like as to what you do like. And a lot of times that, quite frankly, happens in the health sciences. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse or whatever. They get in and, blood isn't their thing. Well, guess what? Exit stage right. We got
Right.
something else for you.
Yeah.
And those stories are equally powerful because kids will tell you as a senior, as a freshman, I thought I was going to do this.
Yeah.
The other thing that if you could see the building, that's kind of neat architecturally, it was designed specifically so that you literally see all of the other areas. And so if you're up there for the Health Sciences Academy, you're going to see welding, carpentry, kids working on computers, drones going on all over the building. You're going to see the firefighters in their full gear running down the hallway, the EMT practicing in the hall. Like, your curiosity is going to be stimulated outside of what you thought you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so that is a very powerful opportunity for kids who may have never considered something like carpentry or welding, but they're seeing it every day. And if they're not all in on what they thought they wanted to do, they start to see the multiple choices that they have.
Yeah. Okay, so in what ways does going to college fit into the Shihadeh Center's ethos and culture?
Yeah, so this is really important. And so I think we would all agree, I'm going to put that out there as an assumption, that over the last quarter century, there's been a hyper focus on sending kids to college. That was the end goal, right? Like as if college was a destination. And so that was the message that parents and certainly counselors and teachers, where are you going to college? What do you want to do? Blah, blah, blah. And we're seeing the shift broadly across the United States of now you don't have to go to college. You can have a good living, have a lot of joy in your life and purpose in not going to college. But we are very clear that we're not saying don't go to college. We're saying let's think career first and then work backwards from that to determine whether college is an important step for you to get to your goal. So college is a point in your journey towards adulthood. The other thing I think that we've started to say to students is college does not have to start when you're 18.
Yeah.
And we bring in adults into our environment that have these wandering paths, right? And it's really helpful for kids to see that life isn't linear. And so adults that may have started at 20, gone into community college and then transferred to a 4-year degree or never went to college at all. And so we're very clear. We're not saying don't go to college. And we have a lot of our students are going to college, probably 40% of them. But we're raising the dignity level for our students who don't. And we're having a more thoughtful conversation, I think, with students and families of whether that's the right decision at this time. We all know about the college debt. We all know about literally over $1 trillion in student loan debt in this country.
Yeah.
So there is certainly a shift happening in our country where we're being much more practical, thinking about that return on investment before we make a $100,000 commitment to a university.
Right.
The other thing I would like to share about college is, that fear factor of your typical college-going family, right? And we all know this family. You could say my family is this family, right? I have a child too. She's 17, and my wife and I are both college educated. We expect our kid to go to college. It's kind of what you do, right?
Yeah.
And so this fear factor of like, oh, well, my kid needs to go get into this college or be competitive, their GPA, et cetera. And what the beauty of this innovation center is, the stories coming out of it for students who are going to very traditionally competitive universities, is the career technical education classes are the differentiator for them.
Yeah.
They are not a subtraction. They are a value add.
Yes.
I have a lot of stories I could share. I'm going to pick one. A student that graduated 2 years ago. In January of his senior year, he passed his national boards for being an EMT, started working in our city, riding the ambulance. He also took AP classes, et cetera. And guess what? He got a full ride to Harvard. So him taking EMT, which is not a weighted class, and quite frankly, took down his GPA of a 4.3. Every time he got an A in EMT, that 4.0 was actually taking his overall GPA down, was seen by Harvard as a value add. This kid has a vision for his life, right?
Yeah.
Though there's a million stories like that. So that's a really important piece of this story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so Jason, in a letter of recommendation written on your behalf 12 years ago, I read the following, quote, Dr. Van Heukelum is able to create an environment of high expectations and high community, bringing out the strengths of those with whom he works, end quote. So, okay, in the context of the John Handley High School and the Shihadeh Center, what does high expectations and high community mean if I am a parent in your community and my child is headed in your direction?
Oh, that's a good question. I always think of my staff first, but thinking from the parent point of view, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think what they experience is on the high expectations side, I would hope and believe most parents want this for their kids, right? You want them to maximize and meet their full potential. We use that phrase all the time. What does that really mean? And in order to do that, you've got to push kids farther than they thought they could go. And so, when you enter into our schools in general, I would say, not just the Innovation Center, we want our teachers and our administrators and counselors to push our students past where they think they could go. We have a phrase here, it comes from my calculus teacher, we want to kick your butt with a twinkle in her eye, right? And so, that describes my calculus teacher. I never doubted for a moment that she cared for me, that she was in my corner, but at the same time, she was not going to let me slack at all.
Yeah.
She demanded more out of me than I was willing to give sometimes, and that made me a better student. And so that's the culture we want to breed with our students. And I think we also do that with our teachers. And we expect the adults in the building to have a similar approach, that we hold ourselves to really high standards and we hold each other accountable for that.
I was thinking as a parent, and if my daughter, who's now 32, were actually headed to high school, Jason, and to the degree that I understand education now, that there seem to be two pathways. One pathway is that competitive pathway that is grade-oriented, scores-oriented, test-oriented, and you're kind of fixed in place. And the other pathway is the high community pathway for her, and that she'd actually be in an innovation center and that she would be experiencing what it's like to be in community, working on stuff that's really real and that really matters with people. That's what I was thinking about in terms of a high community. And as a parent, That would be pretty intriguing for me.
For sure. Yeah. And you do see that. And I think that centers, again, going back to our discussion around trust and relationship,
Yeah.
relationships don't happen in a vacuum. Relations happen around a third point. And so for us in the school setting, and specifically at the Innovation Center, it's happening around projects. It's happening around the career technical classes that they're taking. And that community is really strong. I want to add too, and I haven't mentioned this, like as part of this, we have, community service as a cornerstone of the projects that our students work on.
Yeah.
And so, when a group of students, I'll use our advanced technologies as an example, they regularly go to the Westminster Canterbury home. And these are folks that are, let's say, between 70 and 100, and they are living in this space. And our students go and they help them with everything from how to manage their iPhotos to, working on a computer with them. And then they also work with the IT department and learn kind of the behind the scenes pieces of the actual infrastructure. Well, when a group of 10 kids do that 10 different times during a year, they build community around that and they make connections in the community as well.
Yeah. Okay, one more question in this lightning round before we go to our second break. I want to go back to cathedral thinking. How are you, Jason, working to ensure the Shihadeh Center and the concept that it is remains a hub of education, innovation, and creativity forever and ever? It's that sense of building that cathedral. How do you ensure that it's so strongly rooted that it can't be taken back?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question too. I think it's a good leadership question, regardless of whether it's the Innovation Center or anything leaders put their hand to do.
Yeah.
Ultimately, leaders have a moment, leaders have a window, and those windows close at some point in time. And so you really have to ask the question of what will live on past my leadership. And to me, I've found that in different settings in my career, the things that live past me are things that become so deeply embedded and ingrained in the DNA of the organization that the people involved at the ground level are so committed to what it is that any attempt to sabotage that or hijack that in the future is met with very stiff resistance, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, the one way that you can do it. Certainly you could use policy, you could kind of formalize things, et cetera. But ultimately, it's the people that are the guardians of whatever it is. Getting there has been a challenge. We had a vision. This didn't happen without its own set of challenges. And there were moments where, I had to come into the setting and as the leader say, we're not doing that, or we are doing this. My team will jokingly tell you, like, the one thing was no bells. And I remember early on, as the leaders of the Innovation Center were trying to figure out the vision, multiple times before we opened the doors, they came back and said to me, well, I think we got it. We got a great plan, and we're going to have to put a bell in. And I would wink at them and say, sorry, wrong answer, no bells.
Yeah.
And well, it's not possible. What about this? What about safety? What about, what about mom comes to pick up their kid? I don't know where the kid is. I'm like, well, figure it out. We're not having bells at the Innovation Center. And they did, right? And so that's where the leader has to fiercely guard the vision and have some non-negotiables or some commitment to these kind of practical things, and then force the iteration at the ground level. And that's one example. Another example, at the end of the first year, on the academic side, there was this isn't working. This is too hard, right? And I told them point blank, I said, guys, if we can't accomplish this vision, I will rip the name innovation off this building and we'll just have a trade center. That's everywhere. Everyone has a trade center. But what's innovative about the Innovation Center is the learning model.
Yeah.
And that flexibility and student agency and combining English or a core academic up there, that's what makes it innovative, not the fact that we're teaching career technical education. And so someone's got to be the guardian of that.
Yeah.
And you hope that as a leader, in this case for me, I hope that if and when I do exit Winchester, that message has been so deeply ingrained in the people who are working there on the day-to-day basis that it would continue.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well played. Love the word guardian. It's just a really cool word. And thinking about everybody collectively together in high community as guardians of this idea and of the distinction that is innovation versus just another sort of a trade school of some sort. So that's really cool. So hey everyone, we have been speaking with Dr. Jason Van Heukelum. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Ever made a tough decision and looked back and wondered, what did I miss? What happened? What could I have done differently? I'm Peter Stiebelman, the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. After nearly 30 years in education, I know that real leadership isn't about perfection. It's about learning from mistakes, embracing growth, and lifting each other up. Join me each week as I talk with leaders who reflect on their challenges, their relationships, and the lessons that made them stronger. Because imperfection, that's where the real learning happens. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey everyone, we are back with Dr. Jason Van Heukelum, the Superintendent of Public Instruction in Virginia's Winchester Public Schools. So Jason, more than 10 years ago, while at Vanderbilt University, you wrote a capstone focused on something called Neighborhood Place, which was a bold experiment in collaborative school-based service delivery in Kentucky. And you wrote about how true integration among agencies, education, housing, health, social services, could support family self-sufficiency. So over a decade later, how do you see that vision playing out in Winchester and the Shihadeh Innovation Center and public education writ large? Like, what are the hardest parts of making collaboration real across systems that weren't designed to work together?
Wow, that was a long time ago. So that was a fantastic opportunity 10 years ago or more to investigate and see something in person there in Louisville, Kentucky, where interdepartmental agencies from social services to Job Corps to schools were co-located, which led to what we found to be organic collaboration on the behalf of families, right? Particularly low-income families.
Yeah.
And, I think the biggest lesson that we took from that as we studied that neighborhood place approach was a couple things. One, taking down the barriers of going to the services, whatever the services were, and putting them in a friendly environment, in this case, a school, provided better access for families in need. And then two, simply the co-location of services, literally just having them in the same space, led to organic collaboration. So it wasn't necessarily formalized and didn't necessarily have really tight, job flow from moving from a family from here to here to here. But because of the co-location, that collaboration was measured at a very high level. And so when I think of the Innovation Center, and I hadn't thought of it this way, Josh, so thanks for connecting this dot for me. But what we see at the Innovation Center is similar, and I would say the collaboration among teachers first and students second. Because of the organic, free-flowing nature of the space, teachers don't have classrooms. You have your trade center. They have their classrooms, but our English teachers have office space, and they're out in the building all the time. And so the staff, through the course of a day, are constantly with each other, running into each other, intersecting at different moments. And similarly, our students are. And so there is a high degree of organic collaboration that the Innovation Center facilitates because of the model, right?
Mm.
Because of the less rigidity in the schedule, quite frankly.
Mm.
And so I think that's something that is a lesson around collaboration within the educational space,
Mm.
specifically around, what Neighborhood Place was about, which was meeting the needs of families from food stamps to job placement to mental health, all of the other things that are barriers to learning for students. I would say writ large that, you know, we could learn something from the Neighborhood Place, not just Winchester, but others.
Mm.
We've just recently put a medical clinic in collaboration with our local hospital in the high school. And, just that one act alone has allowed more access to healthcare for our families and our
Mm.
students.
Yeah.
And especially in places like Winchester, for again, just to give some context, Winchester Public Schools, 85% of our students receive free lunch and free breakfast. We have a third of our students are English language learners. We're a majority minority school division. And so, a lot of our families really rely on social services to manage their day-to-day life. And so to the extent that schools can be a catalyst for delivering those services and connecting the dots for families, I think that's really important. One of the roles we have that's one of our most vital roles is parent liaisons in all of our schools.
Mm.
And they help our families connect the dots, not just educationally,
Yeah.
but also with those social programs.
Wow. So I just want to take this one step further. There's, as you well know, because you're in this particular production, What School Could Be, and Ted Dintersmith is coming out with a new film titled Multiple Choice that actually focuses on the Shihadeh Innovation Center. There's a story in that film of a young man who's on his way to becoming a firefighter. And when you talk about connecting the dots, I wonder, and again, this is sort of back to what can and can't be measured, Jason. I wonder that for him, as he forges into this real relationship that he has with both the profession of firefighting and the professionals that work in firefighting, that he's also connecting the dots in terms of education, housing, health, social services, because he's out there in the community delivering services to the community, keeping them safe. Does that make sense? It's very hard to measure that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you're talking of Malachi, of course.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when the film goes live, all the stories are great. But man, this is a kid that brings tears to your eyes. And
Yeah.
to me, it hits on a number of things that we've already discussed. But one is that vision for your life. He did not know he wanted to be a firefighter.
Yeah.
And he never dreamed in a million years of being a firefighter. So, it was there. He saw it. A counselor or a teacher said, "Why don't you try it?" And he did. And this is a kid who lacked direction, didn't know what he was going to do, was somewhat floundering, if you will, in high school.
Yeah.
And he gravitated to the firefighting program. And if you know anything about firefighters, there's a really rich brotherhood, sisterhood among firefighters that when you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
And you're one of them, and they take care of you. And it's a whole nother level. Our Chief Kearns, who runs that program, I mean, he takes all of them in, of course, and introduced him to the firefighting crew around town. And now this kid's 19 and he's a firefighter, right? And so he has a vision for his life. He's got stability. He has a rhythm to his day-to-day life, security in that, paycheck, obviously. And so that is all setting the foundation for this now 19-year-old to, have a family, grow his life, and that's life-changing, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we do at the Innovation Center.
And he also has a community of coaches, mentors, guides, advisors. Every single firefighter in that community is one of those people in his life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And he talks pretty articulately about that. It's pretty cool in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. You posted about him on LinkedIn, and that was fantastic. I was so happy to see that. I loved that photo. And so to our listeners, if you go to Jason's LinkedIn page, you'll actually see that in his feed, a photo of Malachi. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so Jason, one more sort of big question before we come to the end of this amazing conversation. Over the past 10 years, my support for public schools has eroded just a little bit, and I am frustrated by its lack of imagination. Yet I am intrigued by the idea of unbundling education and allowing kids and their families to make more choices when it comes to this thing that we call school. So my prep for today and a video you shared where you make the case for public schools caused me to look deeper into my thinking. And in the end, I totally support the idea of a free public education for all, but I cannot support public education where kids are subjected to hours of seat time, the stress of testing, the anxiety of college or bust pathways, and the tyranny of the Carnegie unit. So let me step off my soapbox and let you make the case for public education and what public education could be.
Wow. All right.
No pressure.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Listen, I too am frustrated, right? And I've dedicated my life to public education. And I get frustrated from a policy level, from some of the constraints that are put on public schools. I also get frustrated with our own lack of imagination, from leaders to teachers, et cetera. And so those assessments are not wrong and not unnoticed. Here's my challenge, and in my own experience, what concerns me when we talk about multiple choices, not for students in the sense of, pathways for their life, but when we go down the road of, universal vouchers, charter schools, et cetera. So let's just get that out in the open.
Yep.
And so what concerns me is humans by nature self-segregate. And, we segregate by our income first, right? And that tells you how much home you can afford. And that puts you in a certain neighborhood in a certain zip code. That's first. Heck, church on Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America.
Yeah.
We segregate even when we could not we could choose not to segregate around religion or church and have some diverse churches, but that's very rare, right? And so we tend to go to our corners when it comes to human nature. And my fear with that is the public school is, to me, one of the last public squares that this country was built on, where people from all walks of life come together, learn from each other, cross their differences, and create that social cohesion that we talk about, that I believe is so important. Because when we all go to our corners, then bad things can happen, right?
Yeah.
And so that's my biggest fear. And we see this. Like, this isn't just a fear I have that's just kind of nebulous. This is real, and the data supports it.
Yeah.
When you implement charter schools broadly, they resegregate our students and our families, right? And ultimately, then we're giving choices to those who already have choices. And yet, the most important thing for low-income families, the number one thing, and this is proven out in all the social science research, the best thing for a poor kid is to go to school for 13 years of their life next to my kid.
Yeah.
That's the best thing for that kid. And there's research that tells us that what we call middle-class values, right? What are middle-class values? Middle-class values are that stereotypical stable home where there's some rhythm in the home. We're not worried about our next meal. There's food on the table. Mom and dad are working, and we're sending our kids off to stable lives. That's middle-class values. And so when students from poverty see that in other children, those middle-class values literally rub off on them. They learn what it's like to do your homework, to sit and listen in class, to do school well, to be good at school, so to speak. And when you take out the social capital from a school, you get to the tipping point. And then you have negative social stereotypes that reinforce each other in the negative direction. The research is very clear. Like, it's a 50-50 split. The best school in America for all kids is when, it's got a great mix of diversity socioeconomically and racially, right? But when you get to that tipping point of high poverty in particular, boy, good luck pulling that back from the cliff. And you're going to need to pour a ton of resources into that school. You're going to have social workers all over the place, lots of counselors, just to learn how to do math, to make sure math is happening. And so, a better question that I might propose Because I think the root of your angst, Josh, is that schools are not innovative and, we're not the Carnegie Unit and all of these things, is why can't we for a moment just stop?
Yeah.
And that's my big question now, having done this for 30 years, like, are we really better off because of No Child Left Behind? No Child Left Behind was implemented to make schools better through accountability. Like, hey, let's hold those schools accountable and we'll get better results. Not sure that's happened. We're still having the same conversation. It's a broken record. And if we just stopped the madness and said, we're not going to do that, what might we unleash in the hearts of our teachers and our administrators and our educators that we can't even imagine, that they are chomping at the bit to do, but they have been now pre-programmed and beat down to the point where it's somewhat mundane and this is what we have to do. And that's what I want to get to the heart of, is how might we rethink accountability? And no one's saying we're not going to stop teaching reading, right? We need kids to read and do math, et cetera, but something's broken and it's stealing the innovative spirit and the joy from the educational establishment.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. You have definitely bolstered my thinking. I absolutely love, Jason, the idea of a public education. What a big, beautiful idea that is, that every kid gets an opportunity to go to school and for free. And yet it's the public schools themselves and their inability or their unwillingness to innovate that is actually undermining the very idea, the very big, beautiful idea. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to accomplish with this particular episode is to get your ideas out there so that more people can understand some of the ways that you can shift your thinking and bring that public education concept to its highest possible place. And I'm really inspired by what's happening with the Shihadeh Center. And I'm inspired that we have a new film coming out that's actually going to show this in some depth and be able to tell the stories or let the kids tell their stories. And so it's not done yet. Public education is not done yet.
Amen.
But it is something that really as Tony Wagner says, the age of acceleration, it really is something that has to move and move quickly in order to reconfigure itself to be what parents want it to be and need it to be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so Jason, I typically end episodes by giving guests the opportunity to shout out to someone upon whose shoulders they stand, that person who mentored, coached, guided, sponsored, and lifted them up. And in your case, that special person is Penny Hedrick. So who is Penny, and in what ways do you carry her with you in your proverbial backpack day in and day out?
Wow. I got a tear in my eye right now, so forgive me. But so Penny Hedrick hired me as a 21-year-old math teacher back in 1997.
Wow.
And she was the principal of Statesville High School and still lives in that community today. As is true with many of us, right? You have people in your life that see something that you maybe don't see, and they speak it into existence. They call it out, and they give you a confidence that you didn't have. And so Penny certainly did that for me. She was my professional mom, if you will. So early on in my teaching career, she was very quick to say, Jason, you're a leader and you need to quickly think about moving into administration. You have an angst about you that you want to change things for the better, and we need you. And so she was my rock in that way and really pushed me forward administratively. And of course, this was outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, in a mid-sized district. And she was then my kind of professional sponsor, right? So because of her, my reputation, my credibility was tied to her, and she had high credibility in our organization. And so, she kind of helped my career move along at a faster clip probably than others because of her advocacy or her kind of stamp of approval. To this day, I think of her and the wisdom with which she led schools. But you mentioned this earlier. She exemplified that high expectation and community, right? And so you didn't mess with Penny Hedrick, let me tell you. Whether you were a student, a parent, or a teacher. When Penny said something, it was yes, ma'am. And she had that kind of assertiveness and carried herself in such a way that everyone knew she was in charge of that high school. At the same time, everyone knew that she cared deeply for you and the school community. And her demand for excellence was out of pride of that community, pride for herself, for yourself, for the students. And you did not want to disappoint her, right? And I love those stories. I think of Coach K. I've never met him, but the famous coach for the Blue Devils. Like his players would walk through fire for him, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's just what you hear. It's like, man, I would walk through fire for him. And that's what she was. She had that essence of you would run through a wall for her. And that was a leadership lesson that I hope in some small way I've been able to carry in my career. And it's, again, those two pillars of high excellence, demanding the most out of you with a twinkle in your eye that says, I care about you and we're going to do this together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Penny, if you're listening to this, #you rock, and we're dedicating this episode to you and all the Pennies out there who have uplifted the innovative leaders that we have in this country and in education. Thank you for everything that you did to lift Jason up and move him forward. And Jason, wow, thank you for today. Thank you for this time to have this conversation. It has been a real joy getting to know you at a much deeper level than I did even 6-8 months ago. And it's just really exciting to think where we're going now, and especially as What School Could Be and Ted Dintersmith, as we get ready to move this film, multiple choice, out into the public. And, you're one of the leading voices in the film. I feel very privileged to have had this conversation with you and to be able to get to know you. So thank you so much.
Well, and thank you, Josh. I feel equally privileged. It's been a joy. And ending with that story with Penny Hedrick leaves me with a little tear in my eye. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.